Well, hello. Welcome once again to Purple Rhetoric. Thanks for tuning in again. And for any first-time listeners, we hope you enjoy and continue to listen each week. I think we're going to plan to continue to do Mondays.
Yeah.
We'll let you know if that changes. I'm not really sure. But I'll just kind of start to kind of go over the docket for tonight. So on Saturday morning, the Senate passed their tax reform bill. It was the end of a long process that involved a significant amount of drama, or especially over the last few days before they passed it. We actually made an emergency podcast Thursday night because a lot of changes were happening and some drama was going on. We actually canceled that because right when we were about to post it, the Senate decided they're going to delay the vote, which is going to be late Thursday or early Friday. So that podcast just lives on in
It's
on my computer.
It's on YouTube.
It's on
if
YouTube
you
too.
really want to listen to it, it's like 13
Yes.
minutes long.
It's great. So we're going to go through the changes that ended up being made to the tax bill from the last time we talked about it, and just go over it one more time. And then Will's going to talk about a couple bills in the House reference to guns. That'll be fun. There's a small potential for a government shutdown. So we'll talk about that coming up, and then we'll get in just a little bit, talk about Roy Moore and the Alabama special election, because that's coming up very soon. December 12th is the date on that, and then for the first time, I think we'll talk about the Donald and just a couple of the incidents that have gone on with Donald Trump in the past week or so. So that'll be interesting. But before I go on, I want to talk a little bit about a little something I saw on Facebook and kind of what I kind of hope this podcast is or becomes. So on Facebook, I don't go on Facebook very often, but I did the other night and saw a post from a former substitute teacher at my high school. And he posted something about our senator, Chuck Grassley, saying that, Chuck Grassley has always said he's going to defend the wind energy tax credit. And now he's not going to do it because it goes away in the Senate bill, and this is outrageous. Call your senator, blah, blah, blah. I was like, that's weird. I've read a lot about this tax bill. I haven't seen anything about that. That's a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
Look in the comments. Yeah, he makes in the comments, okay, so my first post was inaccurate. Look at this thing. There's some very specific detail in this tax bill that might affect some renewable tax credits, I guess. But it just kind of confirmed that I hope everyone who's listening, when you see wild statements on Facebook, even if what is being said coincides with what you already believe about the other side, be skeptical. Be very skeptical because they're usually taken out of context.
I actually have an example of this that we'll talk about later that I found in researching this afternoon.
Yeah. So yeah, don't believe those things. A lot of times these posts divide us. They make the other side look worse than they actually are. So instead, listen to this podcast. Trust me, if there's something outrageous going on, we won't miss it. We do a lot of research. And the key is we do this podcast to inform and not to persuade.
Yeah.
And so
we're trying to stay as informational and nonpartisan as we possibly.
We're not going to be perfect on that. If you think we're not doing a good job of that, call us out.
Yeah, if you have points that are counter, or if you have some point that could suggest another side, then please let us know.
So yeah, from that, do you have a bright spot?
It's not really political, but yes.
Cool. I'm gonna talk about my bright spot real quick. So this bright spot involved a group called Project Veritas, which is a right-wing part of the alt-right, I guess. It's a group that basically tries to make what they call the liberal mainstream media look bad. And so what they did recently was had one of their employees talk to a Wall Street Journal.
Yeah,
Wall Street Journal reporter saying she had been in a relationship with Roy Moore when she was 15, like 1995. They had sex, and he encouraged her to have an abortion, and she did. But bright side, the Wall Street Journal reporter noticed very quickly the flaws in this. And then they actually saw this woman go into that organization's office. And so they snuffed it out pretty quick and obviously didn't report on this. And so that was just, that kind of good reporting happens all the time. But I just wanted to point it out because it's a very recent example.
My bright spot, like I said, isn't actually political, but it's something that I saw that stood out to me amongst when I was reading the news earlier today. And that is that it's monsoon season in Taipei. Ooh. And in the Taipei Mountains, we just broke the world record for the world's longest continuous rainbow.
That's awesome.
8 hours and 58 minutes, shattering the previous record, which I believe was in Ireland or somewhere in the UK, which was 6 hours. So that's pretty cool.
So holla. It is very cool. So those are our bright spots. I'm going to jump into taxes now.
Jump in.
So that kind of drama on Thursday night, some Republican senators had problems and wanted them addressed. Two of them were Bob Corker and Jeff Flake. They were worried about the deficit, and so they wanted what was referred to as a trigger mechanism, which would essentially mean that if the growth that members of the administration have been touting would come from this doesn't actually come from this, and so it does add to the deficit, which the independent analyses show. Then some tax cuts would automatically go away, and so basically dampening the negative effect on the deficit. The problem there was the Senate parliamentarian, basically the rules keeper, or the referee of the Senate, because the Republicans are using what's called budget reconciliation, which has specific parameters, and that's how they're able to pass this without fear of a filibuster. But with that procedure, there's lots of parameters, as I said, and so it did not pass the muster of budget reconciliation. So the parliamentarian said, no, it doesn't work. So that obviously caused drama Thursday night. So the thought was then they'd maybe do kind of the opposite of a trigger, have automatically in like 5 or 6 years, tax cuts go away. And then basically instead of making the change to actually have the tax cuts go away, they'd vote to continue the tax cuts if the economy actually did grow. So it looked like that was what was happening, but then that didn't really pan out. And so the trigger mechanism never ended up in the bill. But they were able to pass it. And so they did that by kind of working on a couple of individual people. So I'll kind of go through those people and what kind of concessions they got from the leadership. So Jeff Flake got a promise on DACA, which I'll talk about in a second. He said that he got a firm commitment from the leadership that they will work with him for fair and permanent protection for undocumented immigrants threatened by deportation by Trump's decision to end the deferred action for childhood arrivals. What is the deferred action for childhood arrivals? I'm glad you asked. So basically, it's immigration policy enacted by the Obama administration where kids basically who were brought into the country illegally by their parents get to receive a renewable 2-year period of deferred action from deportation and are eligible for a work permit. So like 800,000 individuals use this. And research shows that it has increased the wages and labor force participation of those who have joined, reduced the number of unauthorized immigrants living in poverty, and it looks like it's helped the economy. But the Trump administration did scale it. They ended it, but basically gave Congress until March to save the program. So Jeff Flake got a commitment from leadership that they are going to pass some kind of fix on that. So that's interesting. So that's what Jeff Flake got. Susan Collins is another tough vote, and so what she got was a couple of concessions on some of the tax deductions that went away. So as I talked about last time, originally state and local tax deductions were going to go away completely, but Collins won a victory by allowing that you can instead of no state and local tax deduction, you'll be able to deduct property taxes up to $10,000.
Interesting. Okay.
And expanded the deduction for medical costs. So it's basically making itemized a little bit better now.
Okay.
And this is especially a big deal for states with high local and state taxes, which tend to be Democratic states: New York, New Jersey, California. A lot of middle class people in those states would actually are actually probably going to be seeing tax increases just because they normally take the local and state tax deduction, which is a lot of money in their states, and with that going away, it really hurts them. But this will probably help them out a little bit. Two other people, Johnson from Wisconsin and Steve Daines, who I believe is from Montana, they were fighting for a tax deduction for pass-throughs, which are basically businesses that are like large businesses but are taxed on the individual side. And so they want to score that increases the deduction from 20% to 23%. And so they were able to finance this by increasing a one-time tax on multinational corporations. Basically, when corporations bring money from overseas back to the United States, they're basically being taxed at a lower level, but they increased that amount to 14% on liquid assets and 7% on illiquid assets. Liquid assets are kind of just like cash and stuff.
Yeah.
Illiquid is like if you bring a facility back or stuff like that. And this actually works out pretty well for the Republicans because moving those up actually brings them equivalent to what it was in the House. So that's just one less thing that they're going to have to negotiate in the conference committee. A couple other things. So in the Senate bill, they will no longer be repealing what's called the alternative minimum tax. So that's an interesting thing. I didn't talk about that last time. It is a tax that is triggered at a certain income. And so it's kind of a weird thing. It doesn't have the personal exemption or the standard deduction. It also takes away some popular deductions like state and local taxes and some others. So basically, you kind of have to like do your taxes twice and then take the higher tax. Basically, the goal, it was created in 1969, and it was originally called the millionaire's tax because the IRS discovered that like 150 millionaires were paying no taxes because they're using tax deductions that weren't available to the middle class. And so they weren't happy about that, obviously. So they want to make sure they create this alternative minimum tax to make sure that high-income people don't get off tax-free. And so it still is around today. And so they were planning to repeal it, but got rid of it to kind of save some money. So that's going to be staying in place. So another thing is Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, had planned to put in a drilling thing. You talked about this. Open up the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge or Arctic National Wildlife.
It's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
To drilling. And so the parliamentarian originally said there was a no-go, but they basically kind of changed it around. I'm not exactly sure on the fix, but it did pass the muster, and so it is in the bill. And so that's going to be happening. But the thing is, it's probably going to be challenged in courts, and I think they have to do some environmental assessments before that happens. But that could be a thing that happens soon. Oil drilling in Alaska. Another thing was that an amendment proposed by Marco Rubio and Mike Lee was actually voted down. It would have increased the child tax credit and financed it by decreasing the corporate tax cut. So instead of the corporate tax going down to 20%, it would go down to basically 21%, and using that money to increase the child tax credit. But it was actually voted down. All the Democrats voted against it, which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, interesting.
I think that the thought was they knew this bill was going to pass. They want it to be bad, to seem worse. It seems counterproductive. Democrats obviously like the child tax credit and don't like the giveaways to corporate to the corporations. But I think they wanted to be kind of obstructionist or essentially stick the Republicans with a bad bill. And so I guess that's kind of their thinking. It was very interesting there. So the final vote was 51-49. Bob Corker was the only one that voted against it. His statement was he was worried about the deficit, and without that trigger mechanism, he just wasn't able to vote for it. He said it would have been fairly easy to alter the bill in a way that would have been more fiscally sound without harming the pro-growth policies. Unfortunately, it's clear that the caucus is in a different place. He was the one that wanted to kind of get rid of the individual tax cuts and just stick with the business tax cuts. But obviously, the Republicans didn't want to do that, and they lost his vote. But it didn't matter because they had 52. And so they got 51 votes. And that was it. And some interesting things. When this was all these changes were happening on Friday, the final bill came out just a few hours before they ended up voting on early Saturday morning. And so Democrats kind of attacked the process because, they weren't able to finish reading everything. And when it was released, it had handwritten changes in the margins and crossed out text. Unbelievable. I don't know how they don't understand Word or what kind of word processing document they have or program they have, but I think that was funny. The Democrats proposed to delay the vote until Monday so they could have time to read it, but it was rejected. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So what's up next for the tax bill? They go to what's called a conference committee where basically a group of legislators from both the House and the Senate meet up to try to iron out the changes, the differences between the two bills. And then once they do that, it goes right on back to the Senate and the House to vote on the same bill. And then if it's passed once again, it goes on to the president. So that's about it on taxes. Will, would you like to talk about guns?
I have so much to talk about. Well, but first, one thing. I have this cool article that while I was looking at other stuff, there's this article on the Washington Post, which is mostly just there's writing in here, obviously, because it's an article, but there's a bunch of cool graphs comparing this current tax bill and what it's going to do and what it's projected to do, and comparing that historically with all kinds of different tax cuts, just overall tax cuts, and then they have tax cuts by president and by year. And it's just a really cool thing. And I'm going to put it up right now on our Facebook page.
Cool. So yeah, check it out. By the way, Purple Rhetoric on Facebook. Check us out. Pretty cool.
Okay.
So it's up there? Cool.
Yep. And now we get to talk about guns.
Woo-hoo.
Specifically, we're going to talk about two different bills. We're going to talk about, we'll talk about other things as well that relate to these two. But the two main things we're going to talk about are two bills that are in the House right now, which is HR38 and HR4477, which is the the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017, and the Fix NICS Act, which has a great name just because it rhymes.
Worked out well, yeah.
I don't know. Which one are we talking about first?
Reciprocity.
Okay, we'll talk about reciprocity first. Now, the great thing is both of these are 475 pages shorter than the tax bill.
That is nice.
I read both of these in 20 minutes this afternoon. So for those of you who don't know, carry reciprocity, or the word reciprocity in this context, means concealed carry licenses being recognized from other states being recognized all over. So what this bill is proposing is that as long as you are not federally disallowed from owning a gun and you have your state ID and your state issued concealed carry permit, you are legally allowed to carry a gun and you cannot be prosecuted.
Interesting.
So, but and I was talking to David about this. I was really curious about how that affects places like, I believe Arizona has constitutional carry, which for those of you who don't know, the concept of constitutional carry means that it's in the state's constitution, basically, that you have the right to concealed carry a firearm, and therefore you don't need a permit. The way this bill is worded, you need a physical issued concealed carry permit. So states that don't issue concealed carry permits, like I believe Arizona, that doesn't work. Now, the problem that most people who are against this have is that they argue that it will allow people to carry in states that have an issue, like that some states with stricter laws on who can have a concealed carry permit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times happen to neighbor states that don't have very strict regulations on that same thing, and they're worried that this will allow people to carry outside the state, because in some states you don't have to be a resident of the state to get a concealed carry permit. Virginia, I know you can get a concealed carry permit. You can get a non-resident concealed carry permit. The requirements are a little different, but so people are worried about that, and that's a valid worry. I haven't looked up statistics. I don't know what the statistics are on crimes committed by concealed carry permit holders. I see David's looking something up, and this is something that I've always wondered is, so basically the concept of this is what we already have with driver's licenses. David's looking at the full faith and credit clause. The full faith and credit is what guarantees us, like, so that the fact that I'm right now in Mississippi driving on a Virginia driver's license, why can I do that? Because of the full faith and credit. This is the same exact issue. I mean, it's firearms and cars, but they're both rather dangerous things that have varying requirements from state to state. My requirements for getting a driver's license in Virginia are different than Iowa's. They're different than Maryland's. They're different all over the place, but my driver's license is just as valid anywhere. So when I first found out about concealed carry permits, it was like, why doesn't, I never really got an answer as to what that is. So that's kind of, I guess, what this is. Actually, that's exactly what this is trying to do.
The last time I've heard this kind of come up is when the Defense of Marriage Act was struck down in 2015, I believe. Basically, it was the idea that if you got gay married in like one of the early states, Iowa, Massachusetts, and then you moved to a different state, they still had to be, respected, and so it kind of wasn't happening, and so that the Supreme Court struck it down. And so, it's kind of along those lines. Yeah,
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I would like to see numbers about concealed carry permit people from other states, because like I said, it's already an issue. We had this happen maybe 6 months ago. There's a controversy over this in Virginia because, okay, so here's something. For those of you who don't know, there is limited reciprocity with many states already.
Okay.
So like if I get a Virginia concealed carry permit, I can actually carry in a lot of states. I looked it up earlier. There are only 14 states that I can't carry in. But so what happened earlier this year is our governor and Terry McAuliffe and the attorney general, whose name I forget right now, basically suspended reciprocity with a few states because they were saying that people from out of state, from like West Virginia or North Carolina, were carrying into our state because we had reciprocity, so they like suspended those. But there was a massive backlash to it, and they reversed it like a week later. But like this is an issue that has come up before. But there are a lot of states, and I didn't have the time to look up every single state and where they have reciprocity with. But I do have a map here of the states that a Virginia concealed carry permit is valid in, and it's a lot. So I have just real quick, with a valid Virginia concealed carry permit, you can carry in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Wyoming. No, that's West Virginia and Wyoming, but I can carry in Wyoming. Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Maine, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee. I think I said Tennessee already. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and Colorado.
All right.
So the thing is, I would like to see numbers on what we have, what is happening already, because there are a lot of states where you can already go across the border with this permit. So I'm not sure how much this would change, other than like.
Well, it probably helps Yeah, I don't know if you're going into some of those stricter states, I guess.
Yeah, that it's the stricter states that are going to be.
Like,
It's going to be it's going to be
like
like
in Iowa, you have to take like an online class. I know
yeah,
a lot of places you have to take in-person class.
yeah. In Virginia, I believe you have to take an in-person class. But
So,
but states like New York, Maryland, and California, which are three of the strictest.
yeah.
I know in Maryland you have to pay like a $200 insurance fee or something, and then take a class. And the restrictions on the classes are so weird. Like from someone I know tried to get one, and the classes are like $700 or something. Like there's a bunch of hoops you have to jump through. And also in Maryland, if you want one, you have to have a justification. You have to like put in a reason, and the state police get to decide. Because the way concealed carry permits states work is there's three categories. There's shall issue, which means they basically, the default position is to give you a permit unless you are disqualified legally from like a background check. There's shall issue, may issue, where they can decide. The third one, I guess it's not issue. Because there's states that just don't issue them. But like Maryland and California are both may issue states, where it's up to it's just basically up to the state police discretion. Or but so you need a justification. In Maryland, I know the ones that are usually valid are like you are like an armored car company or something, or you like work at a liquor store in the bad part of town.
Got it.
Are usually the people that are allowed to carry. But it's up to, it's not like a committee, it's not a judge, it's just whoever, it depends on the locality, but it's a police official. Anyway, that was a bunch of background because there's not actually all that much substance to this bill. It's mostly just you can do this, and you can't be prosecuted in this case for like crossing state borders with guns. You do still have to follow. Here's something that I just remembered. You do still have to follow restrictions on what kind of gun you can have. So like if you enter California, you can't carry like a gun that's not on their like approved handguns list, or a gun with like a for instance, a semi-automatic pistol with a detachable magazine of more than 10 rounds, because those are banned under California's assault weapons ban. You still have to abide by those rules no matter where you are. Which makes it weird because then, it used to be like before now, it's just you have to make sure you can legally carry. You no longer have to make sure you can legally carry, but you have to make sure what you're carrying is legal in every state that you're going to be traveling through or deciding to carry it. So I don't know. That's an interesting shift of paradigm in that. So that's pretty universally supported by gun people, that from what I've seen. The NRA has voiced support for it. People who are skeptical of the NRA are skeptical of their support for it. The overarching opinion seems to be that the NRA is doing it because they feel they have to. And those who are generally opposed to gun rights and or in favor of gun control, whichever one of those both biased kind of words you want to use, oppose it. It's pretty partisan. Now, the next one we're going to get into is way more complicated and way less partisan. Are you ready, kids? That's going to be the Fix NICS Act of 2017, HR4477. It's a nice number, though. It is much longer and much more complicated. Mostly because if you go on here onto congress.gov and try and read it like I did, almost half of this bill is things that say amending some other law and then only say the part that they change and don't say the rest of it. So you have to go look up the other thing. Namely, the things that it's amending are the Brady bill, obviously, because in case you don't know, the Brady, what's its actual full title? The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993 is the piece of legislation that actually enacted the NICS background checks in the first place. Also, I know we explained it before, I think, maybe. But for those of you who don't know, NICS is the FBI's system of federal background checks that are mandated for all firearm purchases in the United States. Well, okay, all ones that are done through a federal firearms licensee. Private sales, it's on a state-to-state basis. Right. But NICS stands for National Instant Criminal Background Check System, because I cut out a bunch of letters there, but I remembered it this time. So basically what this fixed NICS thing does is it, I guess, part of the Brady, it amends part of it reenacts, what is it, the NICS Improvement Amendments Act of 2007. And there's one other one. It's like the Internet Information, here we go. The Crime Identification Technology Act of 1998. They're all complicated things. So basically what it's doing is it requires federal agencies to submit a plan to the DOJ for accountable for submitting things to the NICS background check system, because that has not been happening. Now, one thing that is happening that I thought was really interesting is not only they're submitting to the DOJ is going to post it on their website. Be able to see if, for instance, I don't know, the Air Force, because that's the one we had issue with recently. You'll be able to see, for instance, if the Air Force doesn't report, or if they're not participating fully in this program, you will be able to see. That's another way they're trying to hold people accountable.
Are they getting? So you think they're getting like some rewards, basically, or
let me look up.
Encouraging.
Yeah, there's incentives, and there's also like deadlines where they have to have a certain amount of things done, and basically it's making them submit every agency has to submit a plan on how they're going to enact this.
Can you tell me how many domestic violence cases have been reported to NICS by, what is it, the Air Force, or just
it's the military?
In general.
So yeah, so this is a number that's coming from the Washington Post on an article titled "Gun Control Rivals Team Up on Bill to Fix Background Check Database" about this fixed NICS bill. And the rest of it's about the bill itself. But at the end, they threw out a very interesting number that I just want to share. Yeah. What this is, to give context on this exact quote, it says on Wednesday, Senators Flake, Heinrich, and Senator Jean Shaheen, which is a heck of a name, called upon the Defense Department to publicize statistics about the number of unreported that have gone unreported. Okay, they used unreported twice, but to the NICS database since 2007. To date, the military has reported only one domestic violence offense to the system. I don't know if that's since 2007. It doesn't really state it, but just one. Just one. Just amazing. Yeah, but so there's incentives. There's specific dates for submission of these things. They have to submit records. They changed what records have to be submitted to NICS. Yeah, like I said, there's an accountability clause. The Attorney General shall establish, including on the website of the Department of Justice, and submit to the Judiciary Committee and Appropriations of the Senate and for the House.
Do you want to read that? Or you want to hear it?
I don't know how echoey this room is. Yeah, but so there's incentives, there's specific dates for submission of these things. They have to submit records. They changed what. Also, hello YouTube. Hope you're having fun. We paused there because there was some noise, and I a little bit forgot that YouTube is streaming live. We'll get back to you in a minute. We have 0 viewers, so
it's okay.
0 viewers, eat your heart out.
We've told no one to.
I put it on Facebook.
Oh, cool.
Facebook. But it's also like almost 10 p.m. on a Monday night, so and on short notice. I don't think people are necessarily sitting there pushing refresh on our Facebook page. I mean, I hope they are, but Yeah, so there's incentives, there's specific dates for submission of these things. It's fine. They have to submit records.
Okay.
I mean, if you really want to get it, we can redo it. Have to be submitted to NICS. Like I said, accountability clause. The Attorney General shall establish, including on the website of the Department of Justice, just keep it. And appropriations of the Senate.
Okay, we gotta see where you're at.
I'm right here. The Attorney General shall establish, including on the website of the Department of Justice. This has all these things. Okay, I'm good. Yeah, so they have to disclose this whole list of things. Like they have to disclose the name of every federal agency that failed to submit the required certifications, and there's a whole long list. We're not going to go deep into that because I'm talking too technically already. There are penalties for the next 5 years for agencies that fail to submit. They're trying to improve the records. I don't know. A lot of this is really technical, like I said, and you have to understand these previous legislations, which I do not necessarily know off the top of my head. But it's all just they're basically expanding NICS and also trying to, enforce people's participation in it because people have not been participating in it.
And this is coming from it was a Texas shooter, right? Who
yeah,
had a domestic
violence. Texas, the Sutherland Springs shooter, domestic violence that had not been. He had been court-martialed and convicted, or maybe he wasn't convicted. No, he was convicted. He was convicted, but he was convicted by the Air Force, and the Air Force didn't report that conviction to the FBI, and therefore he was able to buy a gun.
He held a gun to his wife's head.
Yeah.
And bought a bunch more guns, and then, shot up a school, church. So that's kind of why this is coming out of.
Yeah. So there's all that, and there's like plans for implementation, and there's benchmark requirements. It's all like relatively well thought out, it seems. Also, one hilarious thing that is just thrown in here at the end, that was thrown in here like 2 weeks after this bill was introduced, is a thing that says within 180 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Bureau of Justice Statistics shall prepare and submit to the Committee of the Judiciary of the House of Representatives and the Senate a written report that specifies the number of time a bump fire stock has been used in the commission of a crime in the United States, and then goes on to define what a bump stock or a bump fire stock is.
Very cool.
So I just thought that was interesting because first of all, it's just kind of tacked on there randomly. Also, because they haven't really done. They were talking about doing bump fire stock.
We heard some after that was what allowed the Vegas shooter to. I mean, if you've heard the videos, it was essentially an automatic weapon.
No. That's what it's designed to do. But two things, in my educated opinion, it increases rate of fire. I would think it makes it harder to shoot accurately.
Okay.
But if you're just spraying into a crowd, it doesn't matter.
Uh-huh.
I think this is an isolated incident. There's definitely an argument that bump stocks are like getting around a law, but I really highly doubt that they're a major part of any crime things. So I'm interested if this passes to see what the results of those statistics are, because I think it's monumentally low.
True. And we will get into more gun stuff at a later date.
Yeah, but right now I'm going to talk about a few interesting things about this bill. So like I said, I was looking at, after I read both of these, I went and I kind of looked around at who supported what and why. And first of all, they're apparently, for the vote on this, they're trying to combine HR38 and 4477.
So a win for the gun rights activists, and then this
which is kind of the other way around.
And that's exactly what people
are saying, is that they're doing it because people don't think HR44. I'm just going to say fix NICS. They don't think fix NICS is going to pass because of the Republican Congress and because of just the way things are right now. And gun people don't like this, but not.
Well, it's Cornyn, right?
It's
John Cornyn and
this one is
Murphy.
bipartisan. The fix NICS is bipartisan, relatively. These are the co-sponsors are. How do you say his name? Cuellar, Esty, Aguilar, Castelos.
These are bills in the House. That's why.
Yeah, Spire, Richmond,
I think
McCall, Barbara Comstock from Virginia's 10th district, and Titus. So there's Democratic and Republican support for this, unlike the other one, but people don't like it. Now, what I really want to specifically talk about is why people don't like this, because I think it's important to understand why. Because a lot of times I hear, well, how can you be against background checks? Here's an answer. So I went on a couple forum things to see what individual people thought. I also have a statement here from the Gun Owners of America, which is a lobby group that's smaller than the NRA and not as crazy as the NRA. But they're still very pro-gun. But what they're saying is, what I was saying is the bill expands the records that they want reported to the FBI. And what this is saying is that they think that is going to increase the number of denials, like false denials, because it and I read it doesn't specify that all the records that they want have to be convictions. Specifically on domestic violence, it says they want all domestic violence records reported to NICS, not just convictions. Which means that theoretically, it doesn't really specify in the bill. The bill is pretty vague. They're taking this from one very vague line, and they think that that's going to increase either false denials or that the background checks are going to take longer, and they don't think it's going to help. I mean, the don't think it's going to help thing is a kind of a we shall see kind of deal, but here we go. So this is from HR whatever, fix NICS. Domestic Abuse and Violence Prevention Initiative. For each of the fiscal years 2018 through 2022, the Attorney General shall create a priority area under the NICS Act Record Improvement Program for Domestic Abuse and Violence Prevention Initiative that emphasizes the need for grantees to identify and upload all felony conviction records and domestic violence records. It does not say domestic violence conviction records. The old rule is only on convictions.
So the word there could be, someone could just get falsely accused of domestic violence.
Yeah. And you avoid due process. And the way that works, the way theoretically that works is if you get denied on a background check and you already own guns, I don't know what the process here is, but technically I'm pretty sure the ATF can just show up at your house and confiscate them all because you are, I don't know what the process is there, but it essentially, if that's true, again, it's we don't know, it removes that little bit of due process there. And yeah, that's something I don't agree with. I don't think anyone should have their personal property or rights taken away without a conviction. As flawed as the court process might be in whatever their specific case is, if we just take the due process out of it, then we get into all other kinds of problems. Okay, so it says they're going to use. Okay, this is about funding, but it says something about how they're specifying what kind of records need. In efforts to identify and upload all felony conviction records and domestic violence record described in clauses 1, 5, and 6 of section 102B1C. Is that in this bill? But it wants them to report those no later than September 30th, 2022. Anyway, yeah, just so there's some logic there. In my opinion, we need to NICS does need to be fixed, and it also rhymes. But this isn't necessarily this isn't a perfect bill. It does a lot of things. I'm interested to see how this would fix things.
Mhm.
But also, like, there's a valid argument to let's not see by just enacting it
Mhm.
and discuss it a little bit more.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those two bills go.
Especially if they're combined, that would be.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
I don't know.
Very cool. I'm going to talk a little about the potential government shutdown, I guess. It doesn't look very likely. So the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, will be meeting with Trump and the Republican leaders at the White House on Thursday. Last week, they did not go to a meeting that was planned because, like, a couple hours before, Trump basically said Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are bad, and I don't think we're gonna get a deal. So they were like, well, if he doesn't want to get a deal, we're not coming. So that was a drama, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen this time. We'll see. It looks like they're going to pass what's called a 2-week stopgap bill, basically continue funding the government for basically another 2 weeks, so they have more time to kind of iron out the details and finish negotiations. It looks like it is going to pass. Some Republicans are actually concerned, though, because this would basically punt things to December 22nd, which was right before Christmas. And so they're afraid that, something right before Christmas is going to lead to more Democratic concessions than they want. So that's a concern, kind of interesting concern. Another thing that's kind of involved in this is that the Children's Health Insurance Program, the CHIP program, so Congress let CHIP funding expire in September. And so funding is kind of running out. This provides health insurance to millions of children. And they haven't basically regained that funding yet. It looks like they won't be doing that in the stopgap bill, but they might be providing some funding to basically states whose funds are running really low. But the Republicans have gotten some criticism. Bernie mentioned this in his basically talk about the tax bill, how they're giving tax breaks to wealthy Americans and corporations when they haven't gotten around to ensuring funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program. So that was a big thing. But I will keep you updated if things go bad. But it looks like they're going to punt for 2 weeks and hopefully have something done a little later. On to the Alabama special election. This wasn't really anything. Basically, Jeff Sessions became Department of Justice, right? So his seat, he became
Attorney General.
Attorney General, yes, leader of the Department of Justice. And so a seat opened up. The governor put in this guy named Luther Strange, but that guy actually lost a primary to a guy named Roy Moore. And so it looked like, it's Alabama, Republicans win this win this easy, no worries. But then multiple, I think it's like 6 allegations. From multiple, obviously 6 different women, saying that basically Roy Moore had inappropriate relations with them when they were young, like teenagers, and he was much older, including things, sexual harassment, obviously, and some sexual assault. Very serious things. Messing with minors is no good. And obviously, that's putting it lightly. And so the Democratic opponent, this is now a serious race because of these allegations. The Democratic opponent is got a real bump of now the bump that the Democratic candidate had is kind of going away a little bit. And that's because in Alabama, these allegations aren't believed.
They're not sticking very well.
This is a kind of a crazy new poll, CBS News / YouGov poll. Among Republican likely voters in Alabama, 71% believe that the allegations against Moore are false. Yes. And they believe that the Democrats and the media are behind those, and they overwhelmingly believe that Democrats and the media are behind those allegations. And this is kind of a new thing. There's a lot of distrust in media, especially among the conservative side. And this comes a lot from President Trump, who's talked about he's had an interesting relationship with facts, and has called media fake a lot of times, and obviously discredited all the accusations against him of sexual assault. And so the president actually just endorsed Roy Moore. When these allegations first came out, a bunch of Republicans all said this guy should step down. He should stop running. They should get a new Republican in there. He needs to go. Mm-hmm. Even if he gets elected, they're going to kick him out like right away. But the president kind of stayed quiet and then said, well, Roy Moore denies these things. He denies it, so you have to listen to him too. And then gave his full-on endorsement a day or so ago, saying we should vote for this guy to basically have his vote on things.
Yeah.
Because they need it and they don't want a Democrat. So it's very interesting. The polls look pretty close. Some interesting things to note. So if you go to Real Clear Politics, they have their, I don't know what it's called. Basically, they take an aggregate of the most recent polls and kind of have their spread. And so right now it's a 2.6 point lead for Moore. But the interesting thing is you have to look into some of these. So there's a poll that shows Moore up by 5 points, and that's by JMC Analytics. But in their poll, they only do landlines, and like 50 or 52% of people in Alabama don't have landlines anymore. And so the people in this poll are overwhelmingly older.
Amazing.
And so obviously the people who, still have landlines are much more likely to be Republican, and those who don't have landlines anymore are much more likely to be Democratic. So usually these polls, and Emerson College is another poll just like that, who just uses landlines. When 538 kind of makes their corrections for polls, they usually turn them about 3 to 5 points towards the Democrats, just based off of the sample they get. So that's interesting. So it may look like Roy Moore's got a strong lead, but I think it's pretty up in the air right now.
Yeah.
There was a recent Washington Post poll that had the Democrat up 3, and that James the Analytics, the brand new Emerson one only shows Moore up 3 when their last one had him up 6. And the difference between those two polls is obviously a few days, but in addition, they included this third-party candidate who just recently announced he was former chief of staff to the current chief of staff for Trump, General Kelly. And basically, he's running as an independent, but he's kind of like a Republican independent.
Yeah.
And so that may take some vote away from Roy Moore.
Yeah, good.
So
split the vote.
That's the only poll that has him in it so far. So yeah, we'll have to see. If they get the strong Democratic turnout like we had in Virginia, I think Doug Jones probably wins this thing. But it's really hard to tell in these special elections.
Yeah,
what the turnout's going to be.
Also,
maybe
do
low,
people know that there's an election in December?
Will there be low, Republican turnout because they don't like Moore, or will there be high Democratic turnout in Alabama because they think, hey, maybe they'll get a win for the first time in a long time? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, and we'll obviously continue to talk about this. And then before we go, I'm going to talk about a couple stories about Donald Trump. And they're not really good stories. We are an objective here, but there are some things that are objectively bad.
Yeah, it's like we can only tell what we know, and if it paints badly.
I think almost all Republicans in Congress would not like these things, or would not do them themselves, even if they're not going to bash their president for them. I'm sure they all cringed. Yeah. Or many of them cringed. So the other day, Trump had an event at the White House honoring these Native American code talkers. Do you know about the Native American code talkers?
Navajo code talkers.
Please explain a little bit.
Okay, so basically what we needed was, to my knowledge, it was mostly in the Pacific Theater, but I think they also operated in the European theater. We needed a code that was not breakable by the Japanese. And so what we ended up using was men who were Native Americans who spoke Navajo, but there was they spoke Navajo code. Like, so I forget exactly. It's been a while since I've read about them, but basically they were speaking in code, but also in the Navajo language.
Okay.
But so that we had no, like, no one knew how to decode it. It was just these guys that. So you'd have one of them at every relay station or wherever the messages needed to be received, and so they were all over the Pacific. And that's how we encoded a lot of messages during the war, was these guys coding and decoding messages.
Cool. So, heroes, big help in World War II.
And to my knowledge, none of their messages were ever intercepted, or they might have been intercepted, but the code was never broken. They are still the only ones who know how to read those.
That's awesome.
Those guys who did this in World War II. Yeah.
And so I don't know how this is just it's done on purpose or it's just unbelievable ignorance on the part of the White House. But they had this event with a picture of Andrew Jackson right behind them. If you don't know about Andrew Jackson, maybe one of the first few things that comes up on his Wikipedia page, or when people talk about Andrew Jackson, is his history with Native Americans, and it's not a good history. Going back to the war in Florida, I forget what it was. Atrocities against Native Americans, and then obviously the Trail of Tears while he was president, forcing thousands of Native Americans to leave the Southeast and head northwest. So that was obviously bad. And then he referenced a name. He's called Elizabeth Warren in the past, Pocahontas. I think in 2010, when Elizabeth Warren was first running the Senate, she misspoke and thought that she had Native American heritage because her family had told her that, but it turns out it wasn't actually true. So she got a lot of crap for this and been called Pocahontas a lot of times. And Pocahontas. And so it's definitely not a term he should be using. It's basically a racial slur, and he used it in front of, once again, Native Americans. So that was bad. I retweeted some anti-Muslim videos that were put on Twitter by this far-right United Kingdom party, like very far-right, that just spews hate and a bunch of stuff. And the videos are not even, you don't know if the people are even Muslim, just they have beards. And so basically they were put out there to try to make people hate Muslims, and they were retweeted by the president. So that was bad. And then he's also apparently in private, he's told people that the Access Hollywood tape is not actually him. The tape of him talking about grabbing a woman by the pussy on a bus with Billy Bush, and then there's a video of them walking out of said bus and continuing to talk. He's saying that it was false, even though Billy Bush is in the van, 7 others were in this bus. We laugh, but it's, goodness gracious, guys, this is.
Well, this is exactly what we were talking about when you're talking about Roy Moore, is that there are people that, because it's hard to know, there's so much disinformation and so much Trump either saying this is true and this is not true, that well, if you're not willing to dedicate a lot of time to it, it's sometimes hard to know what to believe. And there are people that, rightfully so, are used to believing what the president says as fact, and the president keeps saying that these things are false, and so people are believing him. Because that's been the president
and they tend to blame. He blames his enemies, and they obviously already dislike those people anyway. So it's not like, oh well, those damn Democrats. I'm sure they would be doing that anyways. And so they obviously playing on fear, encouraging division and distrust, and so definitely those are just a few incidents that have come up and very not good things. So that's about all I have to say. That's about it we have. I don't know if there's anything you want to mention.
I have some more confirmed information that's not me just pulling stuff out of my butt about Navajo code talkers, if you want to hear that real quick. Just a few like quick facts to double check me on what I was saying. So yes, they were speaking code in the Navajo language. The reason they used it is because it's really hard, especially over a radio, unless you're an absolutely raised native speaker, to speak it. That's why they used it as code. It was never broken. But like only people who were raised in the Navajo tradition can speak it. This says that before World War II, or like as World War II was starting, only 30 people that were not Navajo could even understand at all. And there's a quote here from Major Howard Connor of the 5th Marine Division. He had 6 Navajo code talkers who were working around the clock during the first 2 days of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Those 6 men sent and received over 800 messages without a single error. And Major Howard Connor said, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would have never taken Iwo Jima." So I thought that, and they continued. They were not just in World War II; they continued in Korea and in the beginning of Vietnam as well. Cool. Yeah, cool facts.
Yeah. So, thank you for listening. Second episode. We'll probably do one next week. Yeah, check out our Facebook page. We're now on iTunes. We're happy about that. If you have any comments or things you want us to talk about or things we did wrong, let us know. But otherwise, we look forward to hearing from you again or talking to you again in a week.
Yep.
See ya.
See ya.